What's up my friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Picon, one of the crown jewel in mixology because it is unavailable in the US and it's part of the classic cocktail culture. It's one of the key ingredients and one of the most delightful classic. So that makes it almost the bartender's holy grail. So today we're going to talk about what is Picon, but most importantly I'm going to share my recipe for a homemade Picon and you will see it is extremely easy. It's not even like a real recipe, it's just a mix of 4 liquids together, and if you are a cocktail enthusiast, chances are you already have them in your back bar. And I think it's even better than the classic Picon you can buy nowadays, because I don't want to talk too much about this during the intro, but Picon evolved over the years quite a lot and it turned into something not as good as it used to be. And for example, the cocktail everyone wants to make with their bottle of Picon is a Brooklyn, but back to when the Brooklyn was created, the Picon used in the recipe was very different than the one you can buy now. But my recipe is actually much closer to the older version of the Picon, so that's why I say it is even better. So my friends, without further ado, if you are ready, let's talk about and make some Picon. Let's go. Alright, so Amer Picon was created in 1837 by Gentian, a Frenchman who, during his military service, was stationed in Algeria. While his service, he caught malaria, and because prior service he had some distilling background and skills, he created a quinine, gentian, and bitter orange tonic to cure his disease. He named it the Amer Africain, and it was at 39% of alcohol. The name changed over the years from Amer Africain to Amer Picon, eventually Picon Bière, like we know today, and not only the name changed, the ABV and recipes changed as well. So obviously the taste of it evolved as well, quite a lot. And as I wanted to understand as well as possible the evolution of the Picon, as you can see, I went pretty deep into the rabbit hole and tried to find and buy some bottles that were representing the different steps of the evolution. So this one is the modern days Picon, which is at 18% of alcohol. These two are mid to late 20th century at 21% of alcohol. This one is post World War I, which is at 30% of alcohol. And there's one missing from the complete collection, the one from the beginning of the Picon up to 1914, I believe, which was at 39% of alcohol. And while I would really love to try what was the original Picon like, this is most likely the recipe that was used in the traditional Brooklyn, because the cocktail was created in 1914 and the bottle that I don't have, the original Picon, stopped being produced around the same date. So chances are this was the one used in the traditional Brooklyn. And I bought 4 bottles of this. I already opened one and I can tell you that this is very different. Already just the strength and the percentage of alcohol makes it very different, but it's also much more deep and rich in flavor and in bitterness. It has more toffee flavors, more coffee, rich, bold aromatics, and the orange notes are not as bright as in the modern days Picon. So I based myself on this one to create my flavor profile for my DIY Amer Picon. So now let's break down a little more in depth what Picon is so you can understand how I came up with my recipe. Picon is a quinine-based bitter or tonic with both distilled orange and macerated orange, and also both distilled gentian and macerated gentian. So in order to create something that would gather all this beautiful complex flavor profile, I wanted to use some readily available ingredients that were featuring at least one of the components, and once put together, it would taste like Picon. At first, when I started to play with this, I was using as my base a French bitter that was very close to the older version of the Picon in terms of the spices, the complexity, the sweetness, and the ABV, but was lacking the gentian and some of the orange notes. So I was adding only a couple more ingredients to this and the result was pretty close. But unfortunately, China China Bigallet, which was my base, is also something that's sometimes quite hard to put your hands on. So offering this as an alternative was not so useful. So I made some tweaks to the recipe to make it more approachable, and believe me, the result is equally as good. So for the ingredients, what you're gonna need is Averna, Suze, Cointreau, and Angostura Orange bitters. The Averna gives us the beautiful, rich complexity typical to classic amari. The Suze is there for the macerated Gentian and bitterness. The Cointreau for the distilled orange, and the Angostura Orange bitters to add some macerated orange flavor and a little bit more complexity that's very Picon-like with an extra Gentian bitterness. Now, if you have China China Bigallet at home and want to try this whole experiment, I highly recommend using it because in the China China you have some distilled Gentian, which we don't have in these 4 ingredients, and you also have extra macerated oranges. So it really helps to get that full flavor package that you have in the Picon, but the Averna is much more approachable and the result is very similar, especially once the other ingredients are added. So now, let's make it. Before we start with mixing the ingredients, I wanted to stress on the fact that the bitters needs to be Angostura Orange bitters, right? Because the flavor profile of this is so unique, you will never get a similar result using another brand. So this is mandatory for this to work, Angostura Orange bitters. So now to mix things up, you will see it is extremely simple. I personally gonna make a small batch because as you saw, I already have a pretty good supply of different types of Picon, so I don't need a lot of the DIY version. But if you want to scale this up, you just have to multiply all the ingredients by the same ratio. So we're gonna start with 60 ml of Averna, 60 ml of Suze, 25 ml of Cointreau, and 10 ml of Angostura Orange bitters. Then you simply mix to combine. I like to use my magnetic stir because I think it looks cool on camera, but it doesn't make any difference. You can totally use a spoon, and then you simply bottle it up. Alright, so tasting them both side by side, first on the nose you will notice if you have a bottle of Picon and try this whole experiment that the real Picon is bright on the nose. It has that very intense orange aroma, whereas my version of it is richer in terms of spices and you get a smell, very intense nose of Gentian and orange as well. In terms of the palate, this one is more complex, it's richer, it's stronger. The ABV is at 25 while this one is at 18, so we are closer to the traditional older version of the Picon in terms of body, in terms of strength, in terms of bitterness, and in terms of flavors as well. We get rich toffee coffee notes, whereas in the modern days Picon, it's quite unidirectional with orange and Gentian with mellow, muted bitterness, almost like if it was a little bit diluted compared to its older version. So that's why I say that this DIY mix is a better option if you want to make a Brooklyn, just because it will get you closer to what it was when the cocktail was created. Speaking of which, let's try them both again side by side, but this time in the cocktail to see how they compare. So in 2 separated mixing glass, we're gonna add in each 2 ounces or 60 ml of rye whiskey, 3/4 of an ounce or 22.5 ml of dry vermouth, 1/4 of an ounce or 7.5 ml of maraschino liqueur. To avoid any crust contamination, I'm gonna rinse my jigger. Then I'm gonna add on one side the original Picon, rinse my jigger again, and in the other mixing glass, 1/4 of an ounce or 7.5 ml of my DIY Picon. Then we fill both mixing glass with ice. Stir them to 20 to 30 seconds. And finally, simply strain them in a cocktail hoop. In terms of the nose, both cocktails are identical. The rye and the maraschino come through at first, then we get a little bit of complexity from the other ingredients, but that's very subtle, so it's really impossible to identify which one is which. Then in terms of taste, at first I was getting the same feeling. Both cocktails are almost identical, which in a way is good because that means you can use my mix and make a Brooklyn and it's gonna taste like one. And if you're used to drinking a Brooklyn with the Picon that's available nowadays, it's just gonna taste like the real deal. But after a couple more sips, I started to pick up some differences. They're subtle, but they're there. This is not really a surprise that we pick up subtle differences because we're using only 1/4 of an ounce of it in a cocktail that has some strong flavors like the rye and maraschino that oftentimes tend to overtake everything. But we really get some more complexity in the one with my DIY version of the Picon. And I'm not a huge fan of the term complexity here together. Sounds a little bit gimmicky, but it's true. We have more flavors, plural, more layers. It's really hard to name or point all the little extra that we're getting, but one I was able to name is almond, which is a little bit surprising because there's no almond whatsoever in the mix, but it's there and it works really nicely in this cocktail. So overall, we get something that's very true to the classic that works to mimic the Picon, but it has just a slight improvement to make it better. So I'm really happy with the result. Plus it is extremely simple to make. So if you don't have any access to Picon, there's no reasons anymore you don't make yourself a Brooklyn, because the 4 ingredients are readily available almost everywhere. So my friends, this is it for me today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a thumbs up if you did. Don't forget to subscribe before you go, to turn that bell if you want to make sure not to miss the next one. And until then, thank you very much again. Have a great day and see you very soon. Cheers.